Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. Once, he had soared through the heavens, his wings a brilliant display of radiance, the embodiment of all that was pure and holy. But now, he tumbled helplessly toward the earth, like a star that had lost its way, his body aching with the unfamiliar sensation of gravity's pull. His once magnificent wings, which had borne him into countless battles for the light, were gone. His heart, once ablaze with purpose, now felt cold and hollow. The sound of the final battle, the clashing of swords, the deafening roar of dark creaturesses still echoed in his mind, but it was fading, like a dream slipping away upon waking. The last thing Gabriel remembered was the shadow. It had descended upon the battlefield, a dark force so ancient and malevolent that even the greatest of heaven's warriors had faltered. Gabriel had stood his ground. He had fought with all the power the light had bestowed upon him. He had given everything, his strength, his will, his very soul, to push back the darkness. But in the end, it wasn't enough. The shadow had engulfed him, drained him of his divine power, and cast him down to earth, where the mortals dwelled. Now, he was alone. Gabriel landed hard in an alleyway between two crumbling buildings. The impact jarred his bones and knocked the air from his lungs. He gasped, rolling onto his back to stare up at the night sky. It was black, devoid of stars, as though the very light of heaven had turned its back on him. The city around him was equally dark, the buildings looming like silent sentinels, their windows shattered, their walls smeared with filth. Gabriel pushed himself up, wincing at the pain that coursed through his body. He was mortal now. There was no denying it. His angelic grace, once so abundant, was gone. His hands, which had wielded the holy sword with unparalleled skill, now trembled. He reached for the hilt of the blade at his side, but it was no longer there. All that remained was the faint glow of a memory, flickering at the edge of his consciousness. "Where am I?" Gabriel muttered to himself, his voice hoarse. The alley was silent, save for the distant sounds of the city siren wailing in the distance, the hum of traffic, the occasional shout from an unseen figure. Gabriel staggered to his feet, feeling disoriented and weak. He had no idea how long he had been falling, nor where he had landed. All he knew was that he had to find his way back to heaven, back to the light. But as he took his first shaky step forward, he realized that there was no way back. Not yet. Not without his powers. Not without the strength of the light. He was trapped. Gabriel stumbled out of the alley and into the street. The city sprawled before him, a labyrinth of decaying buildings, flickering street lights, and garbage-strewn sidewalks. The air smelled of rot and despair. He could feel the weight of the place pressing down on him, suffocating him, as though the darkness that had consumed him in battle was still clinging to him, refusing to let go. For the first time in millennia, Gabriel felt fear. He wandered aimlessly, his mind racing. He had never been without purpose before. In heaven, he had known exactly what he was meant to do: serve the light, protect the innocent, vanquish the forces of evil. But now, all that was gone. The connection to the light had been severed, and with it, his sense of self. He was nothing more than a shadow of his former self, a fallen warrior cast into a world that had long since forgotten the divine. As he wandered through the city, Gabriel's thoughts turned to the humans. He had always watched them from above, had always seen them as fragile, flawed creatures in need of guidance. But now, as he walked among them, he realized just how broken they had become. The people he passed on the street were hollow, their faces lined with exhaustion and hopelessness. They shuffled along like ghosts, their eyes downcast, their shoulders hunched against the weight of the world. They had lost their faith. Gabriel stopped in front of a small, dilapidated church. Its stained glass windows were cracked, its doors boarded up. Weeds had taken over the front steps, and a thick layer of dust coated the stone walls. Once, this place had been a beacon of hope, a sanctuary for the faithful. But now, it was abandoned, forgotten, like so many other remnants of the past. With a heavy heart, Gabriel approached the church. He could feel the faintest echo of the light within its walls, a distant memory of what had once been. He reached out and placed his hand against the door, but the wood was cold and unyielding. There was no power left here, no sanctuary, no hope. As he stood there, staring at the ruined church, a voice broke the silence. "You're wasting your time." Gabriel turned to see a woman standing a few feet away, her arms crossed over her chest. She was young, perhaps in her late 20s, with dark hair that fell in loose waves around her face. Her eyes, however, told a different story. They were hardened, weary, as though she had seen too much of the world and had long since given up on it. "Who are you?" Gabriel asked, his voice still weak. The woman raised an eyebrow. "I could ask you the same thing. You don't exactly look like you belong here." Gabriel glanced down at himself. His once glorious armor was now tarnished and dented, his clothing torn and filthy. He looked more like a beggar than an angel. "A broken bar, I'm lost," he admitted, his gaze dropping to the ground. The woman snorted. "Aren't we all?" Gabriel looked up at her again, sensing something in her that he hadn't seen in the others. There was a spark, however faint, of something more. She wasn't completely lost. "Not yet." "What's your name?" he asked. "Alara," she replied, her tone indifferent. "Alara," Gabriel repeated, tasting the name on his tongue. "You've given up, haven't you?" Alara's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" "You've lost your faith," Gabriel said, taking a step closer to her. "You don't believe anymore." Alara laughed bitterly. "Faith? In what? God? The light? Whatever you're selling, I'm not buying." "That church you're staring at? It's been abandoned for years. Just like this city. Just like all of us." Gabriel studied her, his mind turning over her words. He could feel the pain behind them, the bitterness that had taken root in her heart. But there was something else, to a something deeper, something that had once been bright. "What happened to you?" he asked gently. Alara's expression hardened. "None of your business." Gabriel didn't press her. Instead, he looked back at the church, at the faint glimmer of light that still lingered in its walls. "I can help you," he said quietly. Alara scoffed. "Help me? You don't even know me." "I know enough," Gabriel said. "I know you've lost something, and I know how to help you find it again." Alara shook her head. "You don't know anything." Gabriel turned to face her fully, his eyes piercing into hers. "I know more than you think, Alara. I know what it's like to lose everything, to feel like you're alone in the dark. But there's still light in you. I can see it." Alara's jaw clenched, and for a moment, Gabriel thought she might walk away. But then something shifted in her expression, a flicker of doubt, or perhaps curiosity. "Why do you care?" she asked, her voice quieter now, almost vulnerable. "Because I've been where you are," Gabriel replied. "And I know what it's like to find your way back." Alara was silent for a long time, her gaze dropping to the ground. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Prove it." Gabriel felt a glimmer of hope stir within him. It wasn't much, but it was a start. "I will," he promised. "But you have to trust me." Alara looked up at him, her eyes searching his face for some sign of sincerity. After what felt like an eternity, she nodded. "Fine. But don't expect miracles." Gabriel allowed himself a small smile. "I never do." The days that followed were difficult. Gabriel stayed close to Alara, slowly gaining her trust, though she remained guarded, her walls firmly in place. She led him through the city, showing him the decay that had spread like a plague. The people were broken, lost in a world where faith had been forgotten, where the light no longer shone. Gabriel could feel it at the absence of hope, the void where faith had once flourished. It weighed heavily on him, a constant reminder of how far the world had fallen. But despite the darkness, he refused to give up. He had once been heaven's greatest warrior, and he still believed in the power of the light, even if it was beyond his reach for now. One evening, as they walked through a park littered with broken benches and graffiti-covered statues, Alara finally opened up. She told him about her past, about how she had once believed in the light, in the divine. But life had been cruel to her. She had lost her family in a senseless accident, and the faith that had once guided her had crumbled in the face of tragedy. She had prayed, begged for a sign, but none had come. She had been left to face the darkness alone. I thought there was a purpose, Allure said, her voice thick with emotion. I thought there was a reason for everything. But there isn't. It's all just a broken bar chaos, and I'm tired of fighting it. Gabriel listened quietly, his heart aching for her. He had heard similar stories from countless souls over the millennia, each one a testament to the fragility of faith in the face of suffering. But Allure's pain was different. It was raw, personal, and it cut deep. I don't have all the answers, Gabriel said softly. I wish I did. But I know that the light isn't gone. It's just a broken bar buried. Sometimes, we have to dig through the darkness to find it again. Allure didn't respond immediately, her gaze fixed on the ground. After a moment, she looked up at him, her eyes filled with unshed tears. Do you really believe that? She asked, her voice barely audible. Gabriel nodded. I do. Allure wiped at her eyes, her expression conflicted. Then prove it. Show me that there's still light in this world. Gabriel knew what she was asking. She wanted a miracle, a sign from above that the light hadn't abandoned her. But he couldn't give her that. Not yet. All he could offer was his presence, his guidance, and the hope that together, they could find the light within themselves. I can't perform miracles, Gabriel said gently. But I can help you find your way back to the light. It's a journey we'll have to take together. Allure let out a shaky breath, her shoulders sagging with the weight of her grief. She looked at Gabriel, and for the first time, he saw a spark of something in her eyes, as something fragile, but unmistakably real. Okay, she whispered. I'll try. Gabriel smiled, feeling the faintest flicker of light within his own heart. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. Gabriel watched Allure as she sat on a rusted park bench, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The tension in her body was palpable, and he could sense the weight of the decision she had just made. It was fragile, like a flickering flame in a storm, and he knew it wouldn't take much to extinguish it. But it was theory. Hope, however faint, had begun to take root again. They didn't speak for a long while. The city's hum drifted around amid the distant honk of car horns, the muffled voices of people passing by, oblivious to the quiet moment of transformation taking place in this forgotten corner of the world. Gabriel, still grappling with his own powerlessness, had to admit that even this small victory felt monumental. Allure shifted on the bench, breaking the silence. So, what now? She asked, her voice low, almost tentative. Gabriel didn't have a clear answer. He had spent millennia guiding souls, watching over humanity from a place of near omnipotence. But here, stripped of his divine abilities, he was as vulnerable as the people he had once sworn to protect. His purpose was unclear, his future uncertain. Yet he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't let the darkness win. We take it one step at a time, Gabriel replied, forcing confidence into his voice. You've already taken the first step by choosing to believe, even just a little. From here, we'll rebuild. Slowly, we'll find the light again. Allure looked unconvinced, but she nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. Gabriel stood and offered his hand to her. She hesitated for a moment, then placed her hand in his, allowing him to help her to her feet. Her touch was cold, and Gabriel could feel the lingering pain beneath her tough exterior. But there was strength in her, to a strength that had been buried for far too long. They walked through the city, moving past the crumbling buildings and broken streets. Gabriel watched the people they passed, studying their faces. Most were as Allure had been: a hollow, defeated, their eyes dull with the weight of a world that had long since lost its way. But there were others, too, whose faces still held a trace of something more. A shopkeeper who smiled at a young boy, handing him an apple. A man who paused to help an elderly woman carry her groceries. These small, quiet moments of kindness flickered in the darkness, unnoticed by most, but not by Gabriel. He held on to these moments, drawing strength from them. The light had not abandoned this world entirely. It was still there, buried beneath the rubble of despair, waiting to be rekindled. As they walked, Gabriel spoke softly to Allure about his time in heaven, about the battles he had fought and the darkness he had faced. He told her about the light, how it had once filled him, guided him, made him whole. He spoke of the final battle, the one that had cost him everything, and of the moment he had fallen, stripped of his power, his purpose, and his identity. "I was so sure of my mission," Gabriel said, his voice growing heavy with the weight of the memories. "But when I lost the light, I lost myself. I never thought I'd be able to find my way again." Allure listened in silence, her expression thoughtful. When Gabriel finished, she looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of empathy and curiosity. "Do you think you'll ever get it back?" she asked quietly. Gabriel hesitated. He didn't know the answer. There was a part of him that believed the light could never truly be restored, that his fall had been too great, his failure too complete. But another part of him, a small, but persistent, refused to let go of the possibility. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I have to try. And I think a broken bar maybe helping others find their light will help me find mine." Allure nodded, though her face betrayed her doubt. "I'm not sure I'm the best person to help with that." "You're already helping," Gabriel said, his tone gentle but firm. "You've already begun to change, whether you realize it or not. And that's where it starts, with a decision to believe in something more." They continued walking, the conversation falling away as they made their way deeper into the city. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the buildings. The air grew cooler, and a soft breeze swept through the streets, carrying with it the faint scent of rain. As they rounded a corner, Gabriel felt a sudden, oppressive presence. His senses, dulled though they were by his fall, flared to life, warning him of danger. He slowed his steps, scanning the street ahead, and that's when he saw them. A group of men stood at the end of the block, their faces shadowed beneath the dim streetlights. There was something wrong about the aim, something that set Gabriel's nerves on edge. The darkness that clung to them was palpable, almost suffocating. And at the center of it all, one figure stood apart, his eyes gleaming with malice. Morwen. Gabriel's heart clenched at the sight of the fallen angel. Morwen had been a warrior once, like Gabrielle, a servant of the light. But he had fallen long ago, lured by the promises of power that the darkness offered. Now, he was a twisted shadow of his former self, a creature of malice and destruction. Allure tensed beside Gabriel, her gaze fixed on the men. "Who are they?" she whispered. Gabriel's jaw tightened. "Stay behind me." Without another word, he stepped forward, positioning himself between Allure and the advancing group. Morwen's lips curled into a cruel smile as he sauntered toward them, his dark eyes locked on Gabriel. "Well, well," Morwen said, his voice smooth and mocking. "Look who's still crawling around in the dirt. I heard you'd fallen, but I didn't think you'd fallen quite this far." Gabriel said nothing, his focus entirely on the threat before him. He could feel Morwen's dark power swirling around him, pressing against his weakened defenses. If Gabriel had still possessed his full strength, he could have driven Morwen back with ease. But now, without his divine power, he was vulnerable. Morwen's smile widened as he sensed Gabriel's hesitation. "What's the matter, Gabriel? Lost your way? Or maybe you've just lost everything?" Gabriel clenched his fists, his body tense with frustration. "I haven't lost the light," he said, his voice steady despite the rising tension. Morwen chuckled, the sound cold and empty. "The light? Oh, Gabriel, the light abandoned you long ago. You're nothing but a relic of a dying age, clinging to a power that no longer exists." Gabriel took a deep breath, refusing to be drawn into Morwen's taunts. He couldn't afford to lose control, and not now, not when Allure's life was in danger. He glanced back at her, catching the fear in her eyes. She didn't understand the full extent of the threat they faced, but she knew enough to be afraid. Morwen's gaze shifted to Allure, and his smile grew darker. "Ah, I see. You've taken to playing savior for the mortals now, have you? How quaint. But I'm afraid this one's beyond saving. Gabriel's anger flared, but he forced himself to stay calm. You don't know her, don't I? Morwen stepped closer, his dark aura pressing in on them. I know all too well what happens to mortals who lose their faith. They become hollow, empty vessels, ripe for the taking. And this Onya, he gestured to Alara with a casual wave of his hand as she's already teetering on the edge. It wouldn't take much to push her over. Gabriel's heart pounded in his chest. He could feel the darkness wrapping around them, suffocating, trying to snuff out the fragile hope he had worked so hard to nurture in Alara. He couldn't let Morwen win. He couldn't let the darkness consume her. With every ounce of will he had left, Gabriel stepped forward, his body trembling with the effort. She's stronger than you think, he said, his voice low but firm. And I won't let you have her. Morwen's eyes gleamed with amusement. Oh, Gabriel, always the hero. But you're too weak now. You can't save any, not even yourself. Gabriel gritted his teeth, his muscles straining as he stood his ground. He could feel the weight of Morwen's power pressing down on him. But he refused to give in. He wouldn't let the darkness win, not this time. And then, something remarkable happened. Alara, who had been silent and still behind him, stepped forward. She placed a hand on Gabriel's arm, her touch steady and strong. He's not alone, she said, her voice clear and unwavering. Gabriel looked at her, surprise and gratitude flooding through him. In that moment, he realized that she had made her choice. She had chosen to stand with him, to fight against the darkness, despite her fear, despite her doubts. Morwen's smile faltered, just for a moment, and Gabriel felt a surge of strength flow through him, and not the divine power he had once wielded, but something deeper, something more human. Hope. With renewed determination, Gabriel faced Morwen, his gaze steady. You're wrong, he said quietly. I'm not weak. And neither is she. For the first time, Morwen's confident demeanor wavered. He took a step back, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. What a broken bar. What are you doing? Gabriel didn't answer. He didn't need to. The light within him, though faint, had begun to glow again, bolstered by Alara's courage and the hope that had taken root in her heart. Together, they stood against the darkness, and for the first time since his fall, Gabriel believed they could win. Morwen snarled, his face twisting with anger. This isn't over, Gabriel, he spat, his voice dripping with venom. You may have won today, but the darkness is everywhere. It's only a matter of time before it consumes you both. With that, Morwen turned and disappeared into the shadows, his dark presence retreating into the night. Gabriel let out a long, shaky breath, his body sagging with exhaustion. He had never felt so drained, but at the same time, he had never felt so alive. Alara stood beside him, her hand still resting on his arm, her expression a mixture of relief and disbelief. Did we broken bar? Did we just win? She asked, her voice tinged with wonder. Gabriel nodded, though he knew the battle was far from over. For now, he said, his voice soft. But Morwen's right, the darkness is still out there. We're going to have to keep fighting. Alara smiled faintly, her eyes bright with the spark of newfound hope. Then we'll fight. Gabriel looked at her, pride swelling in his chest. She had come so far, had found the strength to stand up to the darkness that had threatened to consume her. And in doing so, she had helped him find his own strength again. Together, they would continue the fight. They would search for the light, not just in the world around them, but within themselves. And maybe, just maybe, they would find their way back to the light they had lost.